Hi, in this video I want to show you how you can use the product Microsoft Excel to do a bit of data manipulation and data entry, and then most importantly we'll do some data visualization. So that's using it to create charts and graphs that can show us things we can't normally see within the data itself. It's supposed to be a bit of a how-to tutorial, and we'll just go through it step by step. So I encourage you to, if you're following along, you can pause the video as you're going through to replicate the steps, but you can also scrub through forward or backwards to get to what you need to. So let's get going. So this is the interface for Excel. As you can see, we've got the software already open. And importantly, what you need to know is that the columns are labeled A through a large number of letters and then 1 through a large number of numbers for the rows. We reference a cell just by giving it the column and then the row number. So if I just click on the cell here, that would be B2. Within the interface itself, we've got a bar called the formula bar, where we can enter in formula when we get to doing that, and also entering the data. Also, if you just click on a cell, automatically when you start typing, it will type into the cell itself, but also within the formula bar. It's that easy as far as putting things in, although that data itself is probably fairly useless. So to start with, what I want to do is just start entering some data into Excel. And so I've got some data from an experiment that my students did. And so we're just going to really quickly enter that data. So first of all, I've got the person, because we've got data from each of a group of people from my class. And then we actually have two heart rates. A heart rate from their heart rate at rest when they woke up first thing in the morning, and that's in beats per minute. And the second one is a minute later they took their heart rate after they'd been moving around and standing. So I'm going to call that the standing heart rate, BPM. So I've put the units within there. Now to start with, you can already see that I've got some problems with my columns. So to fix the columns and make them all the same width, so I can see everything, I'm going to select each of the columns by clicking on the top and then dragging across. And then I'm going to use the slider in between and on one of them, and notice that resizes all the columns so they're all the same width. If I wanted to just resize one, I'd just click on one column at the top there and just resize that one column. But I like to have things all very similar, so I'm going to just make sure they're all similar there by selecting all at once and resizing them all at once. The next thing I'm going to do is also make them bold. I like titles to be bold, so I've just used the shortcut there, which is Control B, but I could also do that from the home menu as well and just use the bold command and press that if that's the way I would have liked to do it. So I don't want to identify my students, so I'm just going to call them students 1, student 2, and so on. And I've got 8 students data. And one of the really cool things about Excel is that it can actually recognize patterns. So if I grab that and then I'm going to go down to the bottom right, I've selected both of my cells and go to the bottom right and drag down, it will actually recognize the pattern. And I've got, I think it's 8 students data. So I'm going to drag that down and it's put each of the students in there. So just a really quick time saver. When you've got some patterns in your data, you can drag them through and save a bit of time. So the data I've got for the first person, their resting was 55 and their standing was 69. And I'm just going to enter the data for all of my class now to get that data sitting within Excel. And it's as simple as typing the data and then pressing enter and using the arrow keys to move around. So I'm just going to really quickly do that, and we'll end up with all the data sitting within there. And I'm doing this real time because I want you to see that it's actually very, very quick to put this in. I'm transcribing from a paper notebook as we speak, and now I've got all that data sitting in there and it's digitized, and I've got 7 students data. So I'm going to delete that last one. So there's some basic data sitting within the Excel itself. Because I want to do two sorts of charts, I want to produce a bar chart and a line chart, I need to do some summary bits of information for each of those. To start with, if for a bar chart, I don't want individual bars for each of the people, so I need to work out some averages. So I'm going to, first of all, copy my titles here because it's going to be very easy to do that. So Control C, or again, I can go to the home menu, and then from the command here using copy, and I'm just going to paste that down below because I'm going to make a summary table below. So there's my resting and my standing, and the first thing I'm going to calculate is my average. I could just add all the data up and divide by the number of observations if I wanted to, but this is where I can start to use some of the inbuilt things within Excel, which are the formulas. So if I use the equals sign, that says to Excel that I want to use a formula, and the command I'm going to use is average, and notice that it's given me some options there, and it's given me a prompt to know that that's how I would actually do that. So that's the one I want to use. Once I double click on that, it now tells me I need to give the list of numbers. And so the way I'm going to do that is just come up here and select all of my data. And notice it's done from C3 to C9. So they're the numbers I'm going to average. And to finish the command, I need to close the bracket. So notice now I've got average being the command, open bracket, and then it's C3 to C9 being all my data, and it's selected. And I know it's going to average that, and the equal sign tells it there's a function there. When I press enter, it will do the calculation for me. I can do the same thing over here, just equals average, and open bracket, and drag my data down, and then close bracket, and it will do the same calculation. At the moment, it's got a high level of accuracy, which I don't actually want. So again, from my home menu, I can come over here and I could either increase the number of decimals or decrease the number of decimals. And I'm going to decrease it down to 1 decimal place, just because I think that's a better display of that individual pieces of data. So now I've got my averages done. Something else that I would like to know is I'd like to know what the maximum is. So I want to know the range and also the minimum. And they also have commands within Excel. So I can go equals max, and notice it says returns the largest value. So I'm going to do my open bracket again and say I want to get my maximum value from all of these. And now I'm going to type get my minimum value from all of these as well. So that will start to get me a range of data sitting within there. Another little trick, rather than typing those formulae again, I can just grab both of those cells, and using the selector down the bottom right, notice my mouse changes as I go down to the bottom right, I can now drag that across if I select it correctly, and it will now copy the formulas over. So notice in this one, it says the maximum of C3 to C9. If I click on that, I can see C3 to C9. On this next one, I'm going to escape out of that. On this next one, if I come into the formula, it's equals the max D3 to D9. And if I select the data here, it'll actually show me that the formulas have actually dragged over. And because I've gone one column over, it's actually changed the formulas by one column as well, which gives me a much better, it's given me the correct data it's selecting and a very quick way of doing those calculations. Notice if I did make this mistake just before, but if I click out somewhere else when I'm in that field, it's added that cell. So it says D3, D16 and D9, and that's not going to work because I didn't mean to do that. If I just hit escape, it will actually get me out of that without editing my data. So you need to make sure that you don't click into another cell when you've clicked inside the selection area here. If I select outside, again, it'll just sort it out and make sure that it doesn't make any of those mistakes as we're going through. The next thing that I'm going to do, if I want to calculate the range, I need to know the difference between the maximum and the average. And so I'm going to make some new columns down here, which I'm going to call a max diff, and then a second one which is a min diff. And again, this is going to be a calculation. So to work out the difference between my average and my maximum, and I want this to be just an integer, so I don't want it to be a negative number. So I'm going to say it equals the maximum value, 87, minus the average value. And I've just used the formula there rather than using the values, and it will calculate that maximum difference. For my minimum difference, I'm just going to say equals. This time the minimum is smaller than my average, so I'm going to say my average minus my minimum. I'm just clicking on those cells to select them, and then it will actually work out those differences there. And again, I can just drag that across now, and it will do the calculations for my standing as well. So now we've actually got enough summary information that we can do a bar chart, and we could then also put a range bars on there showing the range of the data. So that's the next process. So to do that, I'm just going to select these 4 cells here, my resting BPM, my standing BPM, and it's got that average data in there. I haven't selected my titles at the left-hand side, my row titles, because I don't want them to be part of the chart. And to insert a chart, I just go to the insert bar, and then I've got to choose my chart type, and I've got a whole range of different charts there. For this first one, I want to insert a bar chart, so it's this first one here, and I'm just going to click on that. It gives me a bit of a preview of the various options, And when I go in there, I don't really like any of these 2D or 3D, these 3D options. I don't think they help anything. I'm just going to choose the basic one here. And we've got the 3D column chart, the 2D column chart coming through. And I'm just going to move that now by clicking and dragging it up. And I'm going to put it up here as part of the cells coming up the top here. To start with, you notice it's automatically decided my range is going to be between 50 and 68. And I actually don't want that to happen. I actually want it to show the 0 value on here. And so I can now click on my vertical axis. I can click on my vertical axis. And now if I go into the format options, I can say I want to format that selection. And it will bring over my format axis options over the right hand side here. Notice the minimum set at 50, and I'm going to change that now to 0 because I want it to go from 0. And I want to go actually as high as 100 because I want to be able to see my data quite well. And I know from experience that's going to be able to do a much better representation, especially once I put my range indicators on there as well. The units, it's going to go up in multiples of 10 with a minor unit of 2, which is going to work really well for me. And so notice now I'm going from 0 to 100. For my chart title, I actually want to add my chart title now, and the chart title should be descriptive. So I'm just going to select the entire title and explain what the experiment was. So it's a comparison of resting and standing pulse rates. And it's for a class of Year 11 students. So that way, anybody looking at this would understand what the experiment has been done just by reading that title. Now I also want to put some axes labels on there. And the way I do that is from my design toolbar, and I want to add a chart element. And so the chart element I want to add is an axis title. So on my primary horizontal axis, I'm going to add that now, and the title for that will be the body position, we'll call that. If I spell it correctly, body position. Meaning it's either they're at rest, they've been lying down, or they've been standing up. And because I need another axis title, I'm going to add another chart element, and I'm going to add my vertical axis, and this is going to be the pulse rate. And the units for that are beats per minute. So now we're starting to get quite a good looking chart sitting there when it comes to my bar chart. The last thing I want to do is on here, I want to give an indication of the range of data sitting on each of the bars using some error bars. And again, I'm going to go into my design menu and I'm going to add a chart element, which is going to be the error bars. And rather than choosing any of the built-in options, I want to go to the more error bar options. And when I do that, I want to add both of my error bars in, and I want to go to a custom value, and I'm going to specify the value from my data set. So for my positive, it is going to end up being my maximum difference. So I need to select both of these here because I selected these 4 cells to make my chart. So these two cells here are going to give my positive error because that's the maximum. And then for my minimum, in that one there, I want to select the right data for those as well, which is going to be these here. And so it gives me the absolute difference there for the minimum value. And now when I hit OK, it's going to put my error bars sitting on there, indicating the range of data for my class. I could do a different sort of error bar if I wanted to. I could do something called a standard deviation. And so if I wanted to calculate that, I'm going to put a title over here, deviation, and I'm going to just do a calculation for standard dev, open bracket, again back to my source data, close bracket, and now that gives me an indication of the spread of my data mathematically. And if I wanted to change these error bars now, so I could then have where they were coming from, I could go to the specifying value again, and I could make my positive value my standard deviation, and my negative value will be the same. It'll be the standard deviation values, and when I hit OK, it will then show the standard deviation sitting on there, which some scientists would argue is a much better representation of what's happening within the data. So there's a few options there for doing a bar chart, I think, within Excel. The second sort of chart that I want to show you is how to insert an XY scatter plot, which will allow us to show relationships within the data. In this case, I want to look at the relationship between the resting heart rate and the standing heart rate. So I'm going to select that data, and the same process as before, I'm going to go to my insert menu, and then now I've got a whole range of charts around here, and I'm going to choose this one down here, which is an XY scatter chart. And when I click on that, I'm going to choose this first option here, which just gives me just the data with no lines attached to that. And just to rearrange these, I'm just going to line these up underneath each other like this. It's automatically detected this is the title, which I know isn't going to be the title, so I'm going to change it now, and I'm going to call this we'll call it the relationship, because that's what it is, and between resting and standing heart rates. We'll call it pulse rates actually, for a class of year 11 students again. And just as before, I want to put some axes titles on there. So I'm going to go to my design menu, and I'm going to add a chart element, which is going to be an axis title on the primary, and it is going to be, so the x-axis is my resting pulse rate in beats per minute. And I'm going to go to my design menu again, add a chart element and put an axis title on the vertical axis, and that will be, if I click on it, that is going to be my standing pulse rate. And now we're starting to get a good indication there. Now, what I'd really like to know is a trend between this data, and I can see there's a bit of a linear trend here, and I'm going to add a trend line. And the way I do that is just by clicking on any one of the data points, and it will select all of my data. And now I'm going to right click, and I'm going to add a trend line. And now my trend line dialog will come up over here. Notice it's already put my trend line in there. And what I'm going to do is ask it to display the equation on the chart, because I think that's really useful. It tells me what the relationship actually is. I'm going to display the R-squared value, because that gives me an indication of how well the model, the line, is actually fitting my data. And then if I select the line again, I want it to actually go back to my 0 value. So I want to go backwards, and I know my lowest value is 40, so I want it to go backwards 40 units from there, so it goes through to my 0 point. So now I've actually got sitting on the chart the relationship showing an R-squared value of 0.88. So it says the model fits the line very well. A value of 1 would be perfectly. And I know the relationship is almost a plus 13. It's almost 1 being the gradient, but it's almost a plus 13 for the class of students here. So that's the difference between their pulse rates. And so that's a really interesting relationship if you think of that from a scientific standpoint. But that's not the point of what today is about. So you can see there's two really different ways of graphing the same set of data, and how fast you can do that sort of thing within Excel. The final thing I want to show you is how to turn this into its own sheet. At the moment, we're just on one sheet here, and this is all sitting on here, but it's not that easy to print this nicely or use it somewhere else. So I'm just going to take one of these charts just by clicking on it, and then I'm going to right click without selecting anything, and I'm going to move the chart using this move chart command. And I'm going to make it a new sheet, which I am going to call XY scatter pulse rate, because that way I know exactly what it is. And I'm just going to make my XY capitals. I think that will look better. And when I hit OK, it's going to move that into its own sheet. So notice at the moment down here, we've got the original sheet, and here's my XY scatter pulse rate sheet. And now all of this is actually presented in a far better way. So if I wanted to print that now, it'd be easier to print. And I could actually change the font sizes of these. So I could make the title a little bit larger in font if I wanted to, just by selecting all of it using the Control A, or manually select it. And then from my home bar, I could change that now and make that, say, 18 size. And it will now look like that. And I just want to grab my chart now, and I'm just going to drag it down and make it so it fits in a little bit better. I'm going to force an enter in front of the class there, just to make it look a bit nicer. And now the title's looking quite good. And now I could do the same for my other axes if I wanted to, but I'm sure that you get the idea now. So that's it, Microsoft Excel and how to use it to do a bit of data entry and create some charts and graphs. I hope that's useful. Obviously, this was all recorded on a PC, but equally, most of these options are available on a Mac and are found in very similar places within Office 2016. Hopefully, you'll be able to find each of those things and use them as you need to if you're on that alternate platform. Okay, good luck.